Okay, so we're going to start with some warm-up stuff before we actually get into Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 2. There we go. Okay, so just to give you some general idea, we are starting to get to like this point now, right? And the way that this particular scene is set up is to highlight the types of conflict that we're going to see as the play builds, ultimately to this climax, right? So when we think about the traditional plot structure, this is what we think of as the Aristotelian plot structure. This is the Freytag's plot pyramid. That's one that like a lot of people are used to. So basically, what happens at the beginning of the story is the exposition. Sorry. It's the exposition, like the background information, the who, what, when, where, why of the play itself. And then we get this rising action. And that's where we are right now. And I know that it says like act one, act two, act three, so on and so forth. You can also think of these as like scenes. So like right now we're in act one, right? And then you can also think of like inside act one, we're finding out a lot of the exposition things, but we're also seeing like how these things are conflicted. So, act one, act two, act three, act four, act five, or you can also do it within the play itself. Act one, scene two, scene three, so on and so forth. So, this is just to kind of like give you a general idea of the different types of plot pyramids that exist. This is also a plot pyramid that exists, and this is Freytag's plot pyramid. This is the more modern one that we think of, where we have like just a little bit of background information before we're tossed into the plot, and the plot makes up the majority of the story. It's the building, rising action. Then we have a climax that happens, the turning point in the story, and then the falling action that happens afterwards. Now, to be perfectly clear, when it comes to like looking at plot pyramids and Shakespearean plays and things like that, there are like whole scholars that are devoted to arguing how these plots unfold and, whether or not they follow Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, or are they more along the lines of this modern versus this more traditional Aristotelian. And like, even is the Aristotelian, like, is that actually like the way that we understand the plot pyramids, right? And so like pinning these things down and saying it is definitively this or definitively that, I think defeats the purpose. And it's much more fun for us to kind of look at how within the play itself, these different conflicts that we're about to see are used as a tool by Shakespeare to understand the different motifs and themes of the play, right? So, like some questions that I want you to consider before we actually dive in. Now, in my live classes, I use these as warm-up questions. And so we'll have like a opening discussion about these things as they're writing these notes down, and just kind of talking through them as they're writing. So the first one is, what is puppy love in your opinion? That young, sort of like fervent, like, "Oh, I'm so excited," that very butterflies kind of feeling. How would you define that? Like, what does that look like to you? And then question number two, what's the difference between young love and old love? So imagine for a moment that you see a young couple, maybe they're like 15 or 16, and they're so in love. They're just, we see this as a high school teacher all the time. You see this, oh, I just can't imagine my life without him. And like, everything sort of like starts to revolve around that relationship because it's new and like they've never felt this type of love before. And so this is all very new and exciting and things like that. And it feels at that time like this is the only love I will ever have for the rest of my life. And sometimes that's true. I know of couples who met in high school, well, met in middle school actually, met in school and ended up getting married and are still together. I'm with my husband after 22 years and they're still together too. And like sometimes it does happen, right? But if we also think about the time period in which Shakespeare was writing this, there is a different notion of love that you might be considered a more mature understanding of love. And that's the partnership model, right? And so, like, hopefully, if you fall passionately in love with a person that you fall in love with when you're very young, you can stay with that person and it evolves into the partnership model. But that doesn't always happen. And especially during the time period in which Shakespeare is putting this play on, and he's writing this play, the idea of marriage for love's sake, for passion's sake, was not common, right? And like it was a thing, especially among classes of people who were free enough to not have social obligations. But I will gently remind you, and we'll see that in this particular act and scene, that Romeo's family and Juliet's family are both of the same dignity, meaning that they are both see to be like noble people. And so during this time period, especially for noble people, they didn't necessarily have that freedom, but it was debatable, right? There were some families who felt like it was important. This is a transition period that Shakespeare is highlighting, saying some people are thinking this way and some people are thinking that way. And the very act and scene that we're working with today highlights that transition, that state of flux that people were in. Do I get married because I know this is going to be a good partnership? It's going to end up helping my family in the long run, politically, sociologically, economically. It will make my family proud that if I marry this person, our names will be joined and that will be better for the future generations. Or should I marry this person because I love them and I find them attractive and I'm feeling chemistry with this person and that's why I should marry them, right? And I don't want to give too much away before we get into the scene, but I want you to keep that because that's a big part of this particular scene, especially for what I think Shakespeare is trying to convey. Number three, what is the purpose of passion? So we talked about this in Act One, Scene One, that the idea of catharsis, if you are a male in this society, is basically like if you're feeling passionate about something, you need to go out and stab, right? That's what you're supposed to do with your passion. You're supposed to take your passion and turn it into violence, right? And Romeo kind of rejects that, and Benvolio definitely rejects that, right? And so it's the idea of being in the experience of brawling love, loving hate, all of those things. But for Romeo, he takes that passion and he puts it towards the idea of being in love, right? Being in love, being out of love, going back to that particular scene where they're going back and forth about the idea, sorry, going back and forth about the idea of like being in love. And how he's basically like, I like this feeling. I like the feeling of love and like being in love and like, ooh, she's a pretty girl and all those things, right? So what is the purpose of that? Can you funnel it into something productive? Can you funnel it into art? Can you funnel it into, your sport? Can you funnel it into something and take that passion that you feel and use it? And if you don't, what happens to it, right? And then this is I find really interesting, and we'll get into this a lot more when we start looking at Lady Capulet. Should all women want to be mothers? Like, big controversial question. Like, what if you have a woman who's like, I don't really want to have children. I don't want to have a child and that responsibility. And maybe I'm not good enough with myself to be able to carry that particular burden. If you think they should want to be mothers, they all should want that, then tell me why. And if not, what would those women who did not want to have children do during Shakespeare's time? Like, what freedoms were they afforded, right? And if they weren't afforded freedoms, what happens to that passion? What happens to that feeling, that anger, all of those things? Where does that go? And then finally, how is love a type of madness? This is going to be something that we talk about a lot throughout this particular play, but definitely in the scenes in which Romeo and Benvolio and then eventually Mercutio start having conversations. Okay, so anchor images to hold on to, mainly just some quotes and some general ideas. There is a part in this particular scene where we hear women being compared to stars that walk the earth. And then we also later hear Romeo compare Rosaline to the thing that he worships as God, right? And that's very dangerous in a Shakespearean play. Don't do that, right? So he basically says that like the devout religion of mine eye, if I'm crying tears over it, and then all of a sudden I look at another girl and I'm like, oh, my tears have dried up. I don't care anymore. And they have like turned tears into fires, meaning now I have a passion for a different woman. Then those tears were heretics, right? So it's again, it's comparing the idea of love, being in love with a woman, being in love with a partner to God. And that's very dangerous, right? We have to be very careful. So we have three different types of love in this particular scene. We have the love for family, we have passionate love, and then we also have this like spiritual undertone love. Love of family comes in between the conversation between Lord Capulet and Paris. Paris is a dignitary, and he basically is trying to ask Lord Capulet for Juliet's hand in marriage. And Juliet is young, and she's the only child that remains alive. All of the other children that Lord and Lady Capulet had died, and so they only have Juliet left. And Lord Capulet says she hath not seen the change of 14 years. She's 13 years old, right? And I just want to mention this because we're going to talk about it later. Lady Capulet, she says in one of her speeches to Juliet that she was younger than Juliet when she was pregnant with Juliet, meaning that Lady Capulet was pregnant with her daughter before her 14th birthday. So that is a very young mother maid. And the reason that's important is that in response to what Lord Capulet says, meaning like she's just a kid, dude, he responds, Paris responds with younger still are happy mothers made. And that's true. During this time period, they didn't live as long. And so, yeah, but also ew, right? And like, not just in a modern context, this would have been young for Shakespeare's time as well. Like, this would have been seen like most people would have been like, I mean, I guess so, but like also no, right? So, like, it was something that was kind of like on the way out. And so, again, transition time. And in response, Lord Capulet says, and too soon marred are those so early made. He's talking about his wife. He's talking about the fact that his wife got like married and impregnated so young. It like messed her up. Like she's marred. She's marked and she's not, she doesn't seem to be very happy or those things. And she passes that on to Juliet, which we'll see. And then again, the idea of familial love, the father defends Juliet's free will, and this will be important later. He says, but woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part, meaning that you have to win her over. If she says no, then I'm going to go along with what she says because it's her will, and my consent to her will is just a piece of it. She's the one who's allowed to decide, right? Now, we're also going to hear a little bit of back and forth between Romeo and Benvolio. Remember, Benvolio is our peacekeeper, and Romeo just loves being in love, right? And so Benvolio, who's kind of like, there's bigger things that we have to deal with, dude. Like everyone's fighting in the street, and this is not cool. You need to snap out of it, right? Basically, Romeo is like, no, I'm so sad. And so he says, Tut man, one fire burns out another's burning. One pain is lessened by another's anguish. Turn giddy, that means be happy, and be helped by backward turning. One desperate grief cures with another's languish. Take thou some new infection to thine eye, and the rank poison of the old will die. So Benvolio believes that the type of love that Romeo is describing is almost like an infection. It's like a disease in his eye because it's all he can see. So romantic love for Benvolio isn't really, that's not really a love, right? So you could say this might be like the fourth idea of love, and that is the love between Romeo and Benvolio, in which Benvolio's like, my guy, you're all you do is like moon about these women, and it's not making you happy, it's making you diseased, it's all you can see. Like, turn around, turn around, bride, like turn around and look at what is actually around you and let the burning that you feel of another girl, let that get rid of the infection of the previous girl. But it's still an infection. You're still taking another infection upon your eye, right? Okay. All right. So let's dive in. We're going to listen and I'm going to stop it a lot.
I'll pay that doctrine, or else die in debt.
That was Act 1,
Excellent.
Scene 1.
Scene 2. A street. Enter Capulet, Paris, and servant.
But Montague is bound as well as I, in penalty alike. 'Tis not hard, I think, for men so old as we to keep the peace.
Of honourable reckoning are you both, and pity 'tis you lived at odds so long. But now, my lord, what say you to my suit?
But saying all what I have said before. My child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her right to be a bride.
Younger than she are happy mothers made.
And too soon marred are those so early made. The earth hath swallowed all my hopes but she. She is the hopeful lady of my earth. But woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part, and she agree, within her scope of choice lies my consent, and fair according voice. This night I hold an old accustomed feast, whereto I have invited many a guest, such as I love, And you among the store, one more, most welcome makes my number more. At my poor house look to behold this night earth-treading stars that make dark heaven light. Such comfort as do lusty young men feel when well-apparelled April on the heel of limping winter treads. Even such delight among fresh female buds shall you this night inherit at my house. Hear all see, and like her most whose merit most shall be.
Okay, so we have two different things that keep doodling, just listen. We have two different things that are happening right here. We have Lord Capulet comparing the idea of lusty love to spring. Okay, so we're moving away from dark winter and we see these like beautiful girls, and as they are walking the earth, they are bringing light from darkness. You know, my dad and I used to always talk about the fact that if you look at religions, especially religious ceremonies in darker months, they all revolve around light, right? The idea of like Candlemas and then also like Yule and then Hanukkah, like the majority of religions, Diwali, you look at these religions that exist in like the darker months, and during those months, light is the focus. Why? Because when it's dark and people are dying of like cold and starvation around you, you have to focus on hope. You have to focus on that. And that's where religion comes in and spirituality comes in, right? The reason that's important is that basically what Lord Capulet is doing is when he's inviting, you know, Paris to come to his house and like come to his party or whatever. But two, he's also saying if this is something that you really want, then I want to make sure that you're not just doing this because my daughter's really pretty, right? I don't want this to just be about lust. I want you to take a look at all of the women that are supposed to be these like fresh young buds that exist in, you know, the beauty of spring, and let your like, you know, spring-like understanding of what love is, young love, you know, new love, all of those things. Look at her among all of these other options, right? And then we can talk about it later. But he's pretty steadfast in the fact that like she needs to be at least 16 and she needs to consent to this. And this is at the time period, you know, again, they're shifting into different ideas of what marriage is supposed to do and what marriage is supposed to be. But this is Lord Capulet saying that my daughter, a female, is allowed to be her own person. So that's level one. Level two, we also have this little nod to the idea of the stars, right? So there is a fate. Remember, Shakespeare is the one who's putting this play on. The people watching this play, for the most part, probably knew what the story was already. And so he is trying to highlight certain aspects of it. So you might say, hey, that's kind of an example of like foreshadowing the idea of like, you know, misaligned stars and misaligned fate, these two star-crossed lovers whose only through their death can end their parents' plight. We start the beginning of the scene with basically Lord Capulet going, we should be able to keep the peace. Why can't we keep the peace? We're two old men. We know better. We don't need to be fighting in the streets. And yet here we are. I feel like we should know better. So the scene begins with a conversation in which Capulet is acknowledging the very grudge that is eventually going to get these two kids killed. Why is the grudge going to get them killed? Because they're in a play. And the whole point of the play is to show we have to sacrifice these two children because that's the only way these two parents or these two families are going to learn the lesson that they're going to learn. So you might argue that this is the beginning part of that whole stars thing, which we're going to see a little bit more of later, right? So when we have this conversation between Capulet and Paris, you might be saying to yourself, my goodness, it sounds an awful lot like he's auctioning off a cow. Like she's not old enough yet. She's not going to milk right. And you're right. It is kind of like that, right? This is where the Shakespearean debate comes in as to whether or not this play is like considered to be like showing how sexist the time period was, or is it reflecting that, right? And I think the answer to that is who cares? So you can look at it either way. You can either say that this is Shakespeare going, yeah, you're right, that's gross. People shouldn't have conversations about their daughters as though they're cows being auctioned off 2 summers later in order to like make good mothers, right? What if Juliet doesn't want to be a mother? Aha, that's the way that the discussion question comes in, right? What if Juliet doesn't want to be a mother? What if she doesn't want to be a wife? What if she wants to be the president, right? And like, again, all of those are very modern constructs to look back at this. But maybe Shakespeare was so aware of the fact that things were changing that he was showing, hey, we're in a state of flux right now, and we as a society get to choose. Do we think women should have free will? Do we think that their consent, is important as far as when it comes to marriage and questions of marriage? Or is this all just one big play that we keep putting on year after year after year, in which we have to sacrifice our children's futures in order to hold on to some old-fashioned idea or grudge that we don't need anymore? Right? Okay.
Which among view of many, mine, being one, may stand in number, though in reckoning none. Come, go with me. Go, Sirrah, trudge about through fair Verona. Find those persons out whose names are written there,
Gives a paper.
and to them say, my house and welcome on their pleasure stay.
Exeunt Capulet and Paris.
Find them out whose names are written here. It is written that the shoemaker should meddle with his yard, and the tailor with his last, the fisher with his pencil, and the painter with his nets. But I am sent to find those persons whose names are here writ.
Okay, so just so you know, that whole part where he's like, he seems to be like mixing up the jobs. So he's basically saying, find them out whose names are written here. It's written that the shoemaker should meddle with his yard, and the tailor with his last, and the fisher with his pencil. So he's basically just like all confused. He's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So he's kind of like a cartoon character and doesn't know what to do. And it's mainly because he can't read. So he's about to say, I'm going to go to a learned person. And he happens to be walking down the street looking for a learned person because he's supposed to give out the invitations. And he's like, I don't know where to go, right? I can't read this. I'm supposed to go to these families' places, but I can't read. Okay. I need to figure out where to go. So I got to find someone who can read and tell me what the names are on these lists so I can hand deliver these invitations. And guess who he's about to stumble upon? Romeo can read. Remember that whole fate, stars aligned, star-crossed lovers?
And can never find what names the writing person hath here writ. I must to the learned in good time.
Enter Benvolio and Romeo.
Tut, man! One fire burns out another's burning. One pain is lessened by another's anguish. Turn giddy, and be holp by backward turning. One desperate grief cures with another's languish. Take thou some new infection to thy eye, and the rank poison of the old will die.
Your plantain leaf is excellent for that.
For what, I pray thee?
For your broken shin.
Why, Romeo, art thou mad?
Not mad, but bound more than a madman is.
Okay, so we're about to hear the whole comparison between madness, but I just wanted to highlight really quickly. This is a great example of Shakespeare using these little jokes about the fact that Benvolio doesn't get it to signal to some of the more learned audience members, right? And so remember, he's got three different levels that he has to entertain. He's got the groundlings, he's got the middlings, and then he's got the aristocracy. And so all of three of these would probably be, watching a play at the same time. So how do you pull all of them in? This is one of those great examples. So we have basically Romeo is, sort of lamenting, and Benvolio's like, enough, enough, enough. And you should, stop worrying about how sad you are. And like, my shin is hurting and all of these other things. And Romeo basically says you should use a plantain leaf for that. Plantain leaf being something that's like a curative, right? And Benvolio's like, what are you talking about, a plantain leaf? That's not what we were talking about at all. Are you mad? And Romeo is responding to this being, okay, I am kind of mad. I am kind of crazy. I'm crazy with love. And the reason that I stopped it to highlight this is that this is where we see a miscommunication happen, but the miscommunication is supposed to be a comedic relief. And on top of that, it's supposed to highlight the fact that Romeo is kind of out of sorts, but being out of sorts actually makes him extremely perceptive. Romeo is very perceptive, and that perception allows him to have these sort of like little inside jokes that even his friends don't get, right? Which to me sounds a little bit probably about what Shakespeare went through when he was younger, right? Having these amazing linguistic insights that everyone else like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, I guess you don't get it because you're not a poet or a playwright, right? So he has this exchange with Benvolio in which they talk about the idea of the plantain leaf. And in response, Romeo goes, yeah, I am actually a little mad. I'm a little crazy with love because I'm chained by it. All right. Okay. So we're going to get into Romeo talking about how love is making him crazy. And that's going to be a motif that we see throughout the play, by the way. The idea of the type of love that Romeo has makes him kind of crazy.
Is shut up in prison, kept without my food, whipped and tormented, and God den, good fellow.
God give good den. I pray, sir, can you read?
Ay, mine own fortune in my misery.
Perhaps you have learned it without book. But I pray, can you read anything you see?
Ay, if I know the letters and the language.
Ye say honestly, rest ye merry.
Stay, fellow, I can read.
Reads.
Signor Martino and his wife and daughters, County Anselmo and his beauteous sisters, the lady widow of Vitruvio, Signor Placencio and his lovely nieces, Mercutio and his brother Valentine, mine uncle Capulet, his wife and daughters, my fair niece Rosaline, Livia, Signor Valencio and his cousin Tybalt, Lucio and the lively Helena, a fair assembly.
Gives back the paper.
Whither should they come?
Up,
Whither?
to supper, to our house.
Whose house?
My master's.
Indeed, I should have asked you that before.
Now I'll tell you without asking. My master is the great rich Capulet, and if you be not of the house of Montagues, I pray come and crush a cup of wine. Rest ye merry.
Exit.
At this same ancient feast of Capulets sups the fair Rosaline, who
Okay, so there's an interesting parallel here. We just heard Benvolio and Romeo talking about the idea of passionate love, puppy love, if you like. I don't mean to be dismissive, but young love, let's say. And then we heard at the beginning of the scene a conversation between Lord Capulet and Paris, and they're talking about established love, more mature love, making sure that my daughter is settled down before she gets too old to be settled down, right? And all of these constructs of different types of love that exist. And now the star-crossed lovers are beginning their pathway. Remember, we had that rising action, right? So we're getting into that idea now and within this particular act, okay? So we have basically the back and forth between Romeo and Benvolio, and now Romeo is aware of the fact that there is a party. How did he become aware? Chance, aka Shakespeare. Shakespeare the playwright is this is a chance in for Romeo to figure out that the party is happening by accident because down comes this server who can't read and they go up to Romeo and they're like, "Oh my gosh, can you read? Can you read?" And Romeo's like, "I can read my misery in my future, right? I know like my sadness and all of those things because he's very upset, right?" And so he says, "Yes, I can." And then he happens to read the guest list. And Romeo's like, who are all these people that are being invited to this amazing party? And the servant's like, oh, yeah, my master Capulet is having a big old party. And Rosaline is on the guest list. So is his friend Mercutio, which is also like an N too. So basically, we're about to hear Benvolio try to convince Romeo to go to this party just the same way that Lord Capulet tried to convince Paris to go to the same party in order to look at women to look at young women. Benvolio is about to give this whole Tut Man speech, in which he basically says, go check out some other girls to get this infection out of your eye, the same way that Lord Capulet told Paris to. That parallel is not by coincidence, it's on purpose, and it's highlighting different understandings of love. What is the purpose of love? And if the purpose of love is to just be passionate and over the top, and as soon as you see another person, you fall in love with them very, very quickly, then that's one understanding of love. If the purpose of love is to settle down your daughter to make sure that she doesn't like make bad choices, then that's another understanding of love. Is love just about motherhood? Is love just about family? Is love about social obligation? What is the purpose of love? And if we don't use love as a catharsis, and instead we only focus on hate, we've got Tybalt, right? Peace, I hate the word, as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee. What do we do with this passion that we feel? Because it can be very dangerous. So Benvolio is about to give a parallel speech to Lord Capulet's in which he tries to convince Romeo, hey, go look at the fresh young buds and check out other girls. And if you're like, ooh, this is really gross, I feel like they're treating women poorly, then you're right. They are viewing women as objects, and that might be why Shakespeare did it this way. Or he might have just been like, yeah, this is what happens.
whom thou so lovest, with all the admired beauties of Verona. Go thither, and with unattainted eye compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow.
When the devout religion of mine eye maintains such falsehood, then turn tears to fires. And these, who often drowned, could never die, transparent heretics, be burnt for liars. One fairer than my love? The all-seeing sun ne'er saw her match since first the world begun.
Okay, so let me just go back and kind of like revisit this. Whenever you've got, and I should have put the actual language down for this one as well, but when you've got these like rhyming speeches, right? So burning rhymes with turning, anguish with languish, I with die. And then we have in the next response, Romeo says, when the devout religion of mine eye maintains such falsehood, then turn tears to fires, and these who often drowned could never die, transparent heretics be burnt for liars. So we have another rhyme scheme in here. And he says, one fairer than my love, the all-seeing sun, never saw her match since the first world begun. Well, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that's, yeah, I think that's a Shakespearean sonnet there. It's pretty darn close. Definitely iambic pentameter. Okay, so why is that important? It's important because between these two, we are basically hearing Romeo compare his love for Rosaline to God. And that's very, very dangerous. But he's not thinking about the consequences because Romeo is a rose. He is simply blooming. What is the point of a rose? The point of a rose is to exist and to bloom and blossom and then be, wonderful and beautiful for us to consume. And then it goes away and it lives its own little rose life and eventually dies. But the flower itself, the blossom itself, the bud itself is there to be fleeting and be experiential, right? On the other hand, if you think about the idea of love as social obligation or contractual, then that's going to be something that's much more established, right? And so Romeo is comparing the feeling, the passion that he has in love when he's in love with Rosaline to God. And that's dangerous in a Shakespearean play. You have to be very, very careful about that. So he's being cast in this like extremely passionate, illogical aspect of love, and it's being contrasted to the more logical aspect of love, the conversation between Lord Capulet and Paris, right? So when this comparison that Romeo makes between my love, the experience of love, and God, that's going to be, I want you to kind of hold on to that for a second because it's the idea of like spirituality and transcendent state of romantic love. When we meet some of the other characters later on in this particular act, that construct of the overlap between spiritual love and also romantic love is going to become very important, right? Especially when we meet Friar Lawrence. Okay, let's listen to the very end of the play, or the very end of the scene, sorry. Last thing is the whole devout religion of mine eye. So basically, Romeo is admitting that what he worships more than anything is feeling in love, being in love, puppy love.
Tut, you saw her fair, none else being by, herself poised with herself in either eye. But in that crystal scales let there be weighed your lady's love against some other maid, that I will show you shining at this feast, and she shall scant show well that now shows best.
I'll go along, no such sight to be shown, but to rejoice in splendour of my own.
Okay, so this is the end of Act 1, Scene 2. And at the very end, Romeo says, I will go along because I know that I'm not going to see anything as beautiful as Rosaline, but I will rejoice in splendor of my own, meaning that I just want to have the experience. He just wants the experience. That's what Romeo's after. He's about the experience. He is living in the moment kind of guy, right? Which, when you're a guy, you can kind of do that, right? And so I want you again, hold on to the idea of Romeo equaling a rose because a rose is about experience, right? If we're thinking about the idea of love being an experience, that's what Romeo is. He's supposed to represent that. And then all of these other little conversations that we have going on are supposed to highlight the difference of the understanding of love.